The economy is supposedly fine, jobs are still being added, the unemployment rate is still low, wages are still growing, and yet millions of people feel like they're falling behind. Groceries still feel expensive, gas just surged, rent, debt, and monthly bills still feel heavy. So what is actually going on? Because if the economy is healthy on paper, but households still feel broke in real life, then maybe we're looking at something very different. Not a textbook recession, but something that feels like one anyway. And that is the real story, the invisible recession. Let's start with the headline data, because this is where the disconnect begins. In March 2026, the US added 178,000 jobs, and the unemployment rate was 4.3%. On the surface, that does not look like a collapsing economy. Average hourly earnings were also up 3.5% year over year. That is exactly why so many commentators keep saying everything is fine. But households do not live inside headline statistics. They live inside monthly cash flow. And when you zoom in on that cash flow, the picture changes fast. In March, consumer prices rose 3.3% year over year, up sharply from 2.4% in February. Core inflation was 2.6%. The biggest shock came from energy. The energy index rose 12.5% over the year, and gasoline prices rose 18.9% over the year. Even worse, gasoline jumped 21.2% in just 1 month, the biggest monthly increase since the series began in 1967. So yes, wages are rising, but prices are hitting people where they notice it most. And that is where the everything is fine narrative starts to break. From a distance, the macro story still looks stable. Payrolls rose in March. Unemployment stayed near a relatively low level at 4.3%. Job openings were still 6.88 million in February. That is enough to support the official narrative that the economy is still growing and the labor market is still functioning. But there are cracks inside that story. The same BLS jobs report says payroll employment has shown little net change over the prior 12 months. It also shows that the number of people who believed no jobs were available for them rose by 144,000 in March to 510,000. Meanwhile, hires fell to 4.8 million in February, and the hires rate was just 3.1%. So this is not a booming labor market. It is a labor market that still looks okay in the headline, but feels harder underneath. That matters, because people do not judge the economy by the unemployment rate alone. They judge it by how hard it feels to get ahead. This is where the pain becomes more visible. Yes, nominal wages rose 3.5% over the year in March, but in the same month, real average hourly earnings for all employees fell 0.6%, and for production and non-supervisory workers, real average hourly earnings fell 0.9% over the month. Over the year, real average hourly earnings rose only 0.3%. That is the problem in one line. People may be earning more dollars, but those dollars are not stretching much further. And when inflation comes through gasoline, utilities, food away from home, insurance, and housing-related costs, it feels worse than the average number suggests. Because households do not experience inflation as a chart. They experience it as a series of small financial defeats. More at the pump, more on essentials, less left at the end of the month. So when people say, "I got a raise but I still feel broke," the data actually supports that feeling. Now let's look at the buffer households have. In February 2026, the personal saving rate was 4.0%, down from 4.5% in January. Disposable personal income actually fell 0.1% in February, while personal consumption expenditures rose 0.5%. That means households are still spending, but the cushion is not exactly comfortable. And that is one of the biggest reasons this feels like an invisible recession. Consumption can stay alive for a while even when households are under pressure. People do not stop spending immediately. They dip into savings. They postpone repairs. They use cards. They stretch. So strong spending numbers do not automatically mean strong household finances. Sometimes they mean the opposite, that people are still trying to maintain normal life even as their margin for error disappears. This is where the story gets harder to ignore. At the end of 2025, total household debt reached $18.8 trillion. Credit card balances stood at $1.28 trillion, and auto loan balances hit $1.67 trillion. Debt by itself is not the whole story. The more important question is, are households struggling to keep up? And the answer there is uncomfortable. According to the New York Fed, the flow into serious delinquency, meaning 90 days or more past due, was 7.13% for credit card debt and 2.95% for auto loan debt in Q4 2025. Across all household debt, the serious delinquency flow rose to 3.26%, up from 1.70% a year earlier. That does not sound like a consumer base that feels financially strong. It sounds like more households are surviving on credit while falling behind in the background. And that is exactly how an invisible recession works. Not through one dramatic collapse, through rising strain that spreads quietly across millions of households. Now, here's the psychological side of this story, and it may be the most important part. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index was 56.6 in April 2026. At the same time, year-ahead inflation expectations jumped from 3.8% in March to 4.8% in April. The university also reported a surge in the share of consumers citing high prices as a reason their personal finances were deteriorating. That matters because economies do not run on income alone. They also run on confidence. If households believe prices will stay high, if they feel every trip to the store costs more, if job security feels shakier, and if debt is taking a bigger share of each paycheck, then the economy will feel weak even before the official data turns decisively negative. That is the heart of the invisible recession. The emotional and financial reality of households deteriorates before the macro labels catch up. And we cannot talk about feeling broke without talking about housing. The Census Bureau said median monthly owner costs for U.S. homeowners with a mortgage rose to $2,035 in 2024, up from $1,960 in 2023, adjusted for inflation. For renters, the situation is also heavy. Over 21 million renter households were cost-burdened in 2023, representing 49.7% of renter households for whom burden is calculated. So even if inflation moderates in some categories over time, housing keeps acting like a pressure plate under the entire budget. And when housing, transport, food, and debt all stay elevated together, households do not need an official recession to feel squeezed. They are already living it. So let's put this together. This is why people feel broke while the data still looks fine. The labor market is not collapsing, but it is no longer giving households the same sense of security. Wages are rising in nominal terms, but real earnings were hit in March and yearly real gains remain thin. Inflation did not disappear. It re-accelerated to 3.3%, with gasoline producing a major shock. Savings are modest and income slipped in February, even as spending kept rising. Debt is elevated and serious delinquencies show real strain. And confidence is weak because households are reacting to what they actually pay, not what economists average out. So no, this is not a clean recession call. But it is a real warning. Because when a large share of the country feels poorer, even with healthy top-line data, that usually means the official narrative is missing what is happening at ground level. And if that gap keeps widening, the invisible recession does not stay invisible forever. Eventually it shows up in hiring, then in spending, then in earnings, then in growth. And by the time the headlines admit it, households have usually been living it for a while already. So the next time someone says, "The economy is fine, look at the jobs number," remember this. A strong headline does not always mean strong households. And right now, the gap between those two things may be the most important financial story in the country. Because the real risk is not just that the economy weakens, it is that millions of people are already behaving like it has. And once that becomes widespread enough, the data eventually follows the feeling. That is how invisible recessions become visible. If you want more deep dive breakdowns like this, the kind that go past the headline and into what is really happening underneath, subscribe to the channel. Because in this market, the surface story is rarely the real story.